This post is really a crossover post. I could put it in the section on the truth about science or the section on the truth about what the Bible says because it has elements important to both. For this reason, I will make a separate section between the two called The Truth About 666. I'm going to touch on some really important Bible topics that I will explain in more detail in the other section. When I was growing up, it seemed that John 3:16 was ubiquitous. When you turned on a sports show on TV, there were always 1 to 2 people in the stands with a John 3:16 sign, or at the airport, people holding signs and passing out tracts, outdoor signs with nothing more than John 3:16 and an invitation to church, and so forth. Now, if you ask most young people what John 3:16 means, they could not give you an answer. But if you ask anyone in the Western world what 666 means, they can all give you an opinion. Some will say it is the devil, some say the mark of the beast, some say the Antichrist, and some say it represents evil. People who know nothing about the Bible know something about 666. However, I would bet money you never heard anyone say, "Oh, 666 is an obvious reference to base 60 math." I think it is, but even if it is not, it provides me a great opportunity to write about base 60 math, the Sumerian Kings List, lifespans before the flood, and ancient technology. Here is the scripture containing the infamous 666 from the King James Version of the Bible, Revelation 13 verse 18 KJV. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. 666 is 660. And 6 or 666. In base 60 math, numbers are grouped in 60s. In base 10 math, which we use today, numbers are grouped in 10s. 110 or 10 to the power of 1, 100 or 10 to the power of 2, 1000 or 10 to the power of 3, etc. Base 60 math is 1. Then 60s or 60 to the power of 1. Then 3600s or 60 to the power of 2. Then 216,000 or 60 to the power of 3, etc. However, it would be right to left, not left to right, groups of 216,000s, 3600s, 60s, and 1s. You may not know it, but we still use the remnants of the sexagesimal system to this day. It is the reason we measure time as 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 6 times 4, 30 days in a month, 6 times 5, and 12 months in a year, 6 times 2, and originally 360 days in a year, 60 times 6. Also, we use base 60 in measuring distance. 1 foot is 12 inches. The foot is made up of 2 spans. A span is 6 inches, or about the distance from your thumb to your little finger when you spread them apart, hence the word span. So 1 span 6 inches times 2 equals a foot 12 inches. 6 spans are 6 times 6 inches or 36 inches, which is a yard. 5,280 feet in a mile is 60 feet times 88. In geometry, it is the reason there are 360 degrees in a circle. 6 times 60. Some of the oldest written records on Earth are the cuneiform clay tablets found in the Mesopotamian area in what is today southern Iraq. It is the ancient land of the Sumerians, and is the source of the sexagesimal system referred to above. Without splitting hairs on which finds are the oldest, some finds date back to around 3500 BCE. However, the tablets I want to discuss here are the tablets or prisms called the Sumerian Kings List. These tablets date to about 1600 BCE. 16 somewhat complete artifacts contain the Sumerian Kings List, or SKL for short. They have some missing lines which can be filled in from the various copies and some other interesting variations. In the same way that our Bible is comprised of thousands of copies of original scripts with errors and omissions in each, by comparing all the copies we can extract an accurate copy because the errors and omissions are seldom repeated in the exact same place. In like manner, we can get a fairly accurate account of the SKL by comparing the 16 different copies. In doing so, we come up with 3 different versions of the dates in the SKL. Those variations themselves prove to be most interesting. As I said, there are 16 somewhat complete artifacts that contain the Sumerian Kings List. They have some missing lines which can be filled in from the various copies. In the same way that our Bible is comprised of thousands of copies of original scripts with errors and omissions in each. By comparing all the copies, we can extract an accurate copy because the errors and omissions are seldom repeated in the exact same place. In like manner, we can get a fairly accurate account of the SKL by comparing the 16 different copies. Probably the most interesting part of the Sumerian king list to most people are the antediluvian kings and the lengths of their reigns. Most copies list 8 successive kings reigning in one of, and ruling all of, 5 different cities. The interesting part is the length of their reigns, lasting from as little as 18,600 years to as long as 43,200 years each. Within the 16 different copies, there are variations of their reigns, but when you total it up, it comes to either 241,200 years, 385,200 years, or 456,000 years. Depending on which version of the list you are reading. Please remember, these are the kings before the flood. Every copy clearly delineates kings before the flood and those after the flood. The SKL always begins with this phrase: after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Then after listing the 8 kings and their reigns, it inserts the phrase, then the flood swept over. The following is a translation from version G, an octagonal prism from Larsa. It is the version totaling 385,200 years. Each king and his reign are listed. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Algar ruled for 36,000 years. 2 kings, they ruled for 64800 years. Then Eridu fell and the kingship was taken to Bad Tabira. In Bad Tabira, Enmenluana ruled for 43,200 years. Enmengal-Ana ruled for 28,800 years. The divine Dumuzi, the shepherd, ruled for 36,000 years. 3 kings, they ruled for 108,000 years. Then Bad Tabira fell, and the kingship was taken to Larak. In Larak, Ensipadzid-Ana ruled for 28,800 years. 1 king, he ruled for 28,800 years. Then Larak fell, and the kingship was taken to Sippar. In Sippar, Enmendur-Ana became king. He ruled for 21,000 years. 1 king, he ruled for 21,000 years. Then Sippar fell, and the kingship was taken to Surupak. In Surupak, Ubaratutu became king. He ruled for 18,600 years. 1 king, he ruled for 18,600 years. 5 cities, 8 kings ruled for 385,200 years. Then the flood swept over. That is one version of the antediluvian king's reigns. The following is the SKL from Weld Blundell Prism 444, which is the most recent of the artifacts. In this edition, the total years are 241,200. What I want you to see in this matrix is they show you the SARs, actually Saros would be plural, but I will go with their chart. The chart shows you the length of the reign of each king in SARs, which is how the years are shown in the original prism. The SAR, pronounced Shar, is the 60 squared unit of measurement in their sexagesimal system. It represents 3,600 units. Thus 10 SARs is 10 times 3,600 or 36000. In like manner, 8 SARs is 8 times 3,600 or 28800. This SAR, as a unit of measure, is where I believe the error was introduced long ago. Remember, these artifacts are copies of information thousands of years old. Even then, the antediluvian information was most certainly lost in the flood, and the information came first orally from the survivors of the flood. Even if you follow the post-diluvian kings, you will find that their reigns were unusually long and gradually became more customary as you get closer historically to the date of the person making the record. Here's my theory on the dates of the antediluvian kings. It all starts with the year. In the time of these kings, the orbit of the Earth was slightly different than today, and there were exactly 360 days in a year. That is the reason they decided to divide a circle into 360 degrees. It took exactly 360 days for the Earth to orbit the Sun. 1 day, 1 degree, 360 days is 1 year, and 360 degrees in 1 circle or orbit. The sexagesimal system they used was perfect for many reasons I will get to in a minute. When you look at how they counted, they grouped 6s in groups of 10. They used these symbols for 1 to 9, these for 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So 59 would be as shown. For 60, they just move the symbol for 1 to the left 1 space, just like we do for 10. Just move the 1 symbol to the left 1 space, except we add a 0 in the empty space. They just left the empty space empty. 60 in sexagesimal cuneiform would be as shown. This is a representation of proto-cuneiform, which is the oldest we have a record of, and would be the closest to what would be the original written record that they could have worked from. The point of all this is to get to the symbol for 3600, which is a sar. This symbol is what is recorded in the Sumerian Kings List and other ancient records and is translated as 3,600 years. I believe the antediluvian world counted in days, not years. The original record, which was copied over and over again, was 3,600 days, not years, and a sar is therefore 10 years, 360 days times 10, or what we call a decade. This correction in translation brings the time of each king's reign into reasonable numbers from impossibly long 36,000-year reign to a 100-year reign. Remember, they grouped multiples of 60s into groups of 10. So, it makes sense that a sar would be a decade. It could well be, as you move forward in time, the notation changed from meaning days to mean years. If that is the case, it is logical for the person making the latest copy to assume the notation never changed and always meant years. This, I am convinced, is the error. I believe I have biblical proof of this theory. As always, archaeology and the Bible will agree if properly examined. Genesis 6 verses 1 and 2 KJV. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Genesis 6 verse 4 KJV. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Every copy of the SKL starts with the phrase, after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Genesis 6 is talking about this very event, when the sons of God took wives from among mankind, and their wives bore giants to them who became the rulers, kings, men of renown. Let's explain the meaning of sons of God. In order to be a son of God, you must be created by him directly. The angels were created by God on the first day of creation according to the book of Jubilees. The sons of God the Bible is speaking about in Genesis 6 are angelic creatures who descended from heaven with the full intention of creating offspring who would rule this world. The sons of the angel-human couple are not sons of God, but are sons of angels pretending to be gods, and therefore they feel entitled to reign as kings over the lesser beings on earth. Hence the phrase, when the kingship descended from heaven. The first book of Enoch gives great details about this time. Genesis 6 is clearly talking about the time that the kingship descended from heaven. There is a lot of detail in the Bible, Jubilees and Enoch, that will support this, but I will flush it out later, or just ask me on the public site of yeetfire.com, and I will gladly go into it further, but there is more on this subject I want to uncover for you. Using the formula that 1 SAR equals 10 years, the SKL breaks down as follows. Remember, there are variations in some versions. Alulim 8 SARs equal sign 80 years. Alangar 10 SARs equal sign 100 years. And Menluana 12 SARs equal sign 120 years. And Mengalana 8 SARs equal sign 80 years. Dumazid 10 SARs equal sign 100 years. And Sapadzidana 8 SARs equal sign 80 years. And Mendurana 5 SARs and 5 Nurs equal sign 58 years and 4 months. Uberatutu 5 SARs and 1 NER equal sign 51 years and 8 months. This group totals 66 SARs and 6 Nurs or 241200 days or 670 years. Using the same method, the version G prism from Larsa totals 385200 days or 1034 years. The WB62 tablet, which is the oldest tablet, totals 456000 days or 1266 years and 8 months. The Book of Enoch says that the angels came down from heaven in the days of Jared. Enoch 6 verses 1 through 8. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders: Samlazaz, their leader, Arakalba, Ramil, Kokablel, Tamlel, Ramlel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zachiel, Samsapil, Satarel, Terel, Jumjael, Sariel. These are their chiefs of tens. We have 3 sources we can draw from to determine when Jared was born and how long he lived. These sources are the Bible in the book of Genesis chapter 5, and the book of Jubilees in chapter 4 verse 15, and the Septuagint in Genesis chapter 5. The problem here is similar to the various Sumerian Kings lists. They do not agree on the date of Jared's birth when calculated in years prior to the flood. So as not to confuse you, each source varies on Jared's lifespan, but all confirm that like all the antediluvian humans, Jared lived for hundreds of years. According to Jubilees, Jared was born 847 years before the flood. The WB 444 says kingship began 670 before the flood, so that would mean that Jared was 174 years old at that time. That is certainly in the days of Jared. According to the Bible, Jared was born 1196 years before the flood. The version G Prism says the kingship began 1034 years before the flood, so that would mean that Jared was 162 years old at that time. That is certainly in the days of Jared. According to the Septuagint, the oldest translation of the Jewish Bible, Jared was born 1282 years before the flood. The WB 62 tablet, the oldest artifact, says that the kingship began 1266 years before the flood, so that would mean that Jared was 16 years old at that time. That is cutting it close, but still, in the days of Jared. Even though the SKL and the Bible, the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch are not related, when viewed with an understanding of base 60 math, they seem to support each other. We have in the Sumerian Kings List 16 non-religious artifacts that, when properly understood, point to men, individually named, who lived before the flood and were kings over 5 cities in southern Iraq. Each of their reigns was successive to the previous and lasted anywhere from 51 up to 120 years each. The length of each reign was recorded using a base 60 numbering system. In previous posts, I have gone to some effort to point out the false narrative that man's science has created. The false narrative creates confusion in people's lives. I am attempting to undo that narrative by presenting the truth. As I have stated before, God created the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them in 6 days. I believe the math that explains the universe we live in is base 60 math. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are the fundamental numbers of creation. If you want to get your physics right, start with that. Nikola Tesla wrote, "If you only knew the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9, then you would have the key to the universe."